ambassador.
I don't think Mandy has any fans here tonight, would you say? Hey, well, good evening. My name is Tom Reichert. Very humbled and honored to be the Dean of the College of Information and Communication. Excited to welcome all of you tonight to this evening with a conversation with Mandy Matney. And I'll say this summer, it was certainly impossible to escape the Murdaugh Murders. I think the biggest question I kept hearing over and over again was not who done it, but is it pronounced Murdaugh or Murdaugh? So we'll get the definitive answer tonight from Mandy for sure. The murders resulted in countless news articles, stories, posts, tweets, and shares, at least 2 documentaries, one on Netflix and one on HBO. Our journalism students even went to Walterboro to cover the trial this summer. And tonight our special guest is someone who was there from the very beginning. Mandy Matney's podcast series, Murdaugh Murders, was groundbreaking. It followed news leads, beginning with the boat crash and every twist and turn before and after. Mandy's work exposed some uncomfortable truths about the criminal justice system in South Carolina and angered some important people. But making friends isn't her job. It is to follow the story and to report the truth. I'm proud to note that Mandy learned these skills as a journalism major at the University of Kansas, where she honed her craft at the student newspaper, the Daily Kansan, and several local newspapers, including the Island Packet in Bluffton. And I could go on, but I would say that in addition to being one of the most popular podcasters in the country, Mandy is now an author. And her new book, by the way, Blood on Their Hands, officially comes out tomorrow. However, the publisher HarperCollins has given us permission to sell them early. And when we finish, Mandy will be available to sign copies here in this auditorium for those who are interested. So our format tonight is going to be informal. It will be a conversation between Mandy and our own Nina Brooke. Nina is a faculty member in the School of Journalism and heads our journalism majors. Previously, she worked as a reporter in Columbia at both the state newspaper and WIS. She also once served as the press secretary for South Carolina's Governor Jim Hodges. You in the audience will have the opportunity to ask questions. Here in the auditorium, we have some of our student college ambassadors who will be distributing and then collecting note cards with your questions. For those watching online, you can post your comments on the YouTube chat. And like all of you, I'm anxious to get to know Mandy Matney better and to get her perspectives on the Murdaugh Murders. So let's get started. Nina.
So, wow, what did you expect that?
That was amazing. This is amazing. Thank you all. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Published author. What does that feel like?
It feels like a dream come true. And I was just talking to a few students before this, and I've said my whole life I've wanted to write a book. I didn't know podcasting existed when I was in college, so the goal was always to write a book. So this is like a literal dream come true, and I just keep telling myself, like, the hard part is over. No matter what happens, if the critics hate it, it'll be fine, because I published a book, and I did that, and I'm really proud of myself.
Right. Well, I think the people here were very excited to get their hands on it. A number of us went and bought our copy as soon as we could. So I think it's going to be a popular success for sure. And who knows about critics, right?
Who cares?
Who knows? So let's just backtrack a little bit and maybe look at and think about how you initially got involved in all of this, because it came from somewhere. Do you remember how this started for you?
As in journalism, or as
the
in
Murdaugh story?
The Murdaugh story.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to rewind to 2019. I was at the Island Packet, and I was an editor/reporter. As a lot of people who have worked in newspapers understand what 2019 newspaper world was like. they were cutting staff constantly, and everybody had to do like 7 jobs. And so I was the Highland Packet breaking news editor, and I will never forget, there was this Sunday, it was a Sunday morning, and started to get text messages that there was a crash, and there was a 19-year-old girl missing. And immediately that morning, and I talk about this in my book, I started hearing the driver is from a powerful family of lawyers, and they look for a cover-up. And that's where everything started.
Right, right. So people had an inkling.
Immediately, like right off the bat.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the first story I saw that you wrote was when Duffy Stone recused himself. Do you think you were
Yes.
that about the beginning?
And yeah, I was working like behind the scenes for the other breaking news stories. But when Duffy Stone recused himself, we really started realizing like this is going to be a way different crime. And then the sheriff's office recused itself. And that just showed how powerful the Murdaugh family was and just how much sway that they had in the area. And it was those 2 months after Mallory died, and we all seemed to be like on the edge of our seats just waiting and hoping that there would be charges. But a lot of people really believed that Paul was never going to get charged and that it was going to just get swept under the rug. And so we, a few of us pesky reporters just kind of kept the story alive and did our part to do that. And then he was charged 2 months later. And that was, even him being charged, I know I say a big deal a lot, but it was a big deal.
It's okay. When it is a big deal, you can definitely say it's a big deal. So y'all really, there was no gap between understanding that this was a little more going on than people thought.
And I think that speaks to how important sources are and how important it is to we started immediately that week talking to people from Hampton and getting an understanding of the power of the Murdaugh family and getting an understanding of what was going on here and getting an understanding with local law enforcement and things like that. And they were all just screaming, this is a much bigger story. And I talk about it in my book, but one of my first sources, Olivia, I remember sitting down with her, and she said, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound like a Netflix documentary. And I will never forget that. And
it will be.
Beyond. Then that was, again, 2 years before the murders and 2 years before most of the world found out about it. But yeah, it was absolutely crazy. But I listened to my sources, and my sources were everybody was saying this is a bigger story.
So were you able to give it the attention that you wanted at the paper? Did you get support to do that?
No.
Yeah, that was, my original question was going to say, did you not get support?
No, I look back on that time, and I looked the other day at the newspapers, and I was like writing daily newspaper stories about stupid stuff like business openings and.
I looked it up.
Yeah.
An alligator stops a round of golf.
Yes,
Where to park on St. Patrick's Day was a highlight.
So what I did was I would like crank out like page views, like stories that would get good page views, and they would be really easy, and then I would spend the rest of the day like digging for documents or at home a lot of the time. A lot of my work on this case was literally just done at home with me and Liz just being curious and not wanting to stop. So.
Did you get the editor, why are you so hung up on this boat crash?
Lesson in gaslighting there. They really, my editor, I'll never forget, said he was literally bored by boat crash stories. And it blew my mind because I was like, this is the most important story I've ever come across in my entire journalism career. And it's getting better page views than my stupid alligator stories that were also getting really good page views at the time. Why don't you care? Like, people care about this. And it just eventually got to the point where I was like, I can never do this story in the way that I want to working for this newspaper. So I need to make some moves.
You seem to have a sense about like what people want to know. Do you think? You're born with that, or?
Yeah, I figured that out when I was working at McClatchy, and I honestly, they put me on a national news desk when I was, I think it was 2017, and I was really excited about it. But it was a team of people that our whole goal was to get, like, I think each of us had to get 1 million page views a month. Like, our job was to crank out 5 stories a day and write about the dumbest things on the internet. And it was the most, like, depressing. Like, I was just remember sitting there but because of that job, I figured out what people on the internet were interested in, what they would click on, what they wouldn't, how to write headlines in the way to get people to click on your story, and that stuff's important. But I was writing stories about, like, women marrying themselves and just the dumbest things on the internet, and I was like, why are we doing this at McClatchy? Like, I am supposed to be working for a newspaper company,
right,
and I'm writing trash right now. And so I learned from that job, but at the same time, I knew that things were not going in the right direction.
Right. That had to have been difficult, I guess.
Yeah, it was. But I was glad I learned that stuff. And yeah, I mean, like, how to write a story in a way to get people to listen to it and click on it is extremely important. And I think that eventually helped me with the podcast.
Yes. So I want to let everybody here know and let you know, Mandy, that we do have viewers watching on YouTube all over the country right now on both of our feeds. We have 2 feeds going right now. And remember, if you're in the hall, you can write questions on your cards and someone will collect them for you, and we'll have a time for that near the end. And then if you're online, you can chat in those YouTube views to ask your questions, and someone will collect those here as well. So is that why you moved to Fitz News, to online news?
Yeah, I was tired of management. Sorry, guys. I was tired of management at the Island Packet. I was tired of feeling like I was never going to be good enough there. No matter what I did, I always felt like it wasn't going to satisfy my boss or satisfy the company or whatever. And also, I just noticed we weren't focusing on the most important things, and the mission was lost. It wasn't about journalism. It was about basically keeping the Island Packet afloat. So, yeah, I made a move, and I'll call it an online. I made a move to an online news outlet, and
Not the blogosphere.
we could call it the blogosphere. It's fine.
I've heard it called.
But yeah,
the
I think this is another good part of my book that I'm really excited to get my story out there, because I think people will understand why I made that move in the position. Like, looking back, it was kind of like when you have a bad ex-boyfriend and you move to a less bad ex-boyfriend.
Yes.
And you're not quite there yet, but you're still figuring things out. That was
not
my
a
move
match
to the
made in
blogosphere.
heaven,
yes.
necessarily.
So, but it was good at the time, and I got freedom to write about the things that I wanted to, and I got to basically, I worked alone. I worked from home, and what I just wanted is people to get off my back. Like, I didn't want a boss telling me to crank out alligator stories and stuff. So for that, I think it was a good move, and it all worked out. So
When you were there with that site, you were pretty critical of the mainstream media, we shall call it.
Yeah.
What do you think about that now? Was that fair? Were you still mad, or?
I was I will say this, I look back on some of my tweets and I was like, ooh, a little rough around the edges, Mandy. Like, you could have been smoother about that. But I think we were so small and fighting for, like, relevance, and I thought that I was a part of that news organization to make it mean something, to make it, I thought we were there to change journalism, and I was just getting really, really tired of other bigger news organizations that would just basically pick up the reporting and not credit the tiny guys, and that would make me mad. But I also get it. I understand media is complicated, and another thing with media is that a lot of journalists don't get paid enough, and a lot of journalists are just doing the bare minimum because it's a hard job, and they just, you know, it's hard to do everything, and you are open to critics all the time, and so I get that, but I still am critical of mainstream media, and I'm very vocal about that, mostly just for not asking basic questions. Like, I think our jobs as journalists is, we're not supposed to be rewriting press releases. We're not supposed to be responding to things constantly and waiting for the next filing and then just basically writing a summary of that filing. We're supposed to be asking questions. We're supposed to be putting the bigger pieces together. And I get frustrated when media is just kind of all recycling the same narrative over and over and not really stopping to think about it.
You want them to be pesky.
I want them to be pesky and just care a little bit.
One thing you were kind of critical of was, I guess, a perception that certain reporters, I'll name John Monk for one, were maybe a little too close to Dick Harpootlian and people like that, because he wrote a profile of them. You know, looking back at that, was that fair? Do you still feel that way?
Yeah, I think that I think a lot of reporters have bias in their reporting and claim to be unbiased, and they don't even realize it. I think that I think that John Monk is great, and he's a really, really nice person, but I think he's also doesn't understand that he writes from the white male perspective, and he does not see things the way that I see them, and because of that, like, I look in his stories a lot. He quotes the same white male lawyers over and over again to make the same points, and that's bias. And I think that I'm fine with admitting to bias. Like, I don't like Alex Murdaugh. I'll be very honest about that. That's an honest thing. But I think reporters aren't robots. Like, it's very normal for us to use our perception and our experiences and where we came from and use that into our reporting. And I think that we should just be more transparent about that versus this is the unbiased way to look at things, if that makes sense.
Yes, I understand definitely what you're saying. As the story grew in importance, do you think the coverage got any better as people began to pay a little more attention to the Murdaugh story?
Yeah, there were some really, really great stories from a lot of local journalists. There was Drew Tripp from WCIV has done a fantastic job. His Twitter covering things, and he is just so, I like his attention to detail, and he also gets the bigger perception, and he asks the bigger questions. There's been a lot of really great coverage, and I don't, by all means, I do not want to say that, like, I'm the only one, and people always say that one of my biggest critics, and I try really hard not to read the critics, but I know that a lot of people think that I think of myself as like the only source, and that's not it at all. I just want people to understand that media should just ask harder questions and be a little bit more critical of, say, like Dick Harpootlian when he's spilling out lies over and over again, and ask yourself, like, if this source has lied to me this amount of times, why am I treating this source as just as reliable as the prosecution who has not lied throughout things like that? We're supposed to weigh.
Yes.
And I think that that's something that's getting lost in journalism.
Yes, there's been discussion of false equivalence. That's
Yes,
been a big
yeah,
discussion.
and, right, and go ahead.
No, that's...
that's a great thing. I mean, and the, what is it called? Balance, like, what is balance in a
Right.
story? And that's real, it's a tough thing to do, but I don't think that, the best saying, and I remember, and I'm probably fast forwarding in the answer of this question, but I remember distinctively when Alex Murdaugh got shot, and I'm going to say Alex By the way, I'm so mad at myself that I said Alec at the beginning of the podcast.
Were you just buying
It's
into
the
the
most
local?
annoying name.
You taught us all the way to say it.
I know.
I noticed the network news change how they said it. As
Yeah,
you taught
it's
them
one of
how
my
to say
it's one of my biggest regrets. It is how they all pronounce his name, but it's a stupid way to pronounce his name. Eric, who is here, has always just been. Eric's always calls him Alex, and it's like, I don't care what you want to be
the
called.
way it's spelled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he calls that's hard. Yeah.
I have heard you say that now that you mentioned that. I definitely.
But at the time, I was trying to get street cred in Hampton. Like, I was trying to be able to, I wanted to be a voice that people thought that I sounded like I knew what I was talking about. And people in Hampton talked like that.
Right.
So,
Right.
But anyways, I regret that entirely. I wish I had
That's
Alex
interesting.
Murdaugh from the very
So
beginning.
that kind of leads us to the podcast because that's where we all heard that. How in the world did you just decide one day I'm going to start a podcast, or how did that happen?
So throughout the pandemic, my wonderful he is a husband now, but he was a fiance and a boyfriend throughout the pandemic. We have progressed. And there he is. We kicked around the idea ever since the boat crash happened of having a podcast about the boat crash because I've always been interested in true crime podcasts. I listen to Serial, I listen to Dirty John, and ever since I heard like the 911 call of the boat crash and several different things, I really wanted to start a podcast. And then it was one of those things. It's like, we'll get to it eventually. We'll start this podcast next week. And then the murders happened and things just spun out of control so quickly. And I'll never forget, I was on my back porch and saw a video of Nancy Grace, and she was talking about the Murdaugh case and basically saying, I bet it has to do with the boat crash kids, that like, I bet this is a revenge killing. She was insinuating that it was a revenge killing of some sort. And that made me so angry. And I started to see headlines of that, of like, this is a revenge killing for the boat crash and blah, blah, blah. And it all clicked that like, people were not understanding the story, and they were not understanding how complicated this family was and all of the ins and outs, because it's the easy thing to do, to look at the Murdaughs and it's like, oh, what happened? A boat crash. Oh, it must be a revenge. But it's so much more complicated. And Alex wanted us to believe that.
Right.
And so that was my main motivator of like, I gotta get people to understand this.
Right.
And it has to be done in a way that people pay attention. What can I do? A podcast. And then so David learned how to edit, and we sat at the kitchen table for 60 hours, and it was a terrible time, but we figured it out.
You figured it out. Okay, so let's rewind to the first time that we heard the Murdaugh Murders podcast.
I don't know who killed Paul Murdaugh. I don't know who killed Maggie Murdaugh. I can't say who killed Stephen Smith. I don't know who, if anyone, killed Gloria Satterfield. But I think I know who killed Mallory Beach. And I know that her family will never get justice in her case. And that keeps me up at night. My name is Mandy Matney, and this is the Murdaugh Murders podcast.
And then the comments.
Oh, the comments. I can hear the vocal fry.
So it's true then? You think it's true? Accurate?
I mean, I was also working from a very terrible microphone, and
Yes.
I was working really, really long hours, and I think my voice was just really tired, and I think that was a big part of it. And we didn't know, like, how to make a podcast sound good, and, like, I listen to that now, and I can hear, like, that, and we know how to fix those things now. But it was so frustrating at the time when we were trying to record and just trying to get through it, and I was, again, like was splicing words together. I couldn't even say full sentences into the microphone. It was really bad. But I learned that, like, you don't have to be perfect to put something out, and you don't have to be, people will still listen to it if you're a good storyteller and if you have a good story to tell, and it does not have to be perfect. And I've made it a point to not re-record those episodes because I want you to hear that, like, where I started and where I am now and where our team started, and that you can hear the growth and the progression. Like, it does make me feel a little weird to listen to this because I can, like I say, I can hear the vocal fry, I can hear the taps, but I'm proud of it because it's a part of the journey. That's a good thing.
Well, people learn and grow when they do something.
Right.
So that's fair for you too, right?
Yeah, and you don't have to be perfect when you start out. And yeah, we could have edited that thing forever and it wouldn't have mattered.
People were mean though.
Very mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was in journalism for about 10 years, and you were on TV, you did TV. Like,
Yes.
in journalism, you get used to mean comments, and I was used to that on, like, a local level, you know, but not to that extent. I don't like the sound of my own voice, but I thought that nobody liked the sound of their own voice.
Yeah, I think that too.
Right, like, it would used to drive me crazy to listen to the sound of it, like, but I've just gotten used to it. So I didn't really know how to critique my own voice as we were doing it, but then as soon as we started the podcast and we put it out that morning, the first few emails that came in were like, you're a really great storyteller, but you have to have somebody else tell this story because your voice is so bad. And, like, change your voice, you should get a vocal coach, like, just very mean things. And I hope that people realize that, like, that stuff almost stopped me. And I hope that they stop and think about, like, should I send this email? Like, do I really want her to stop what she's doing, or do I really want this person to be self-conscious about their voice? Is this really necessary? And I remember I was really struggling because the week after we produced that podcast, every day I was trying to do my reporting. I was juggling phone calls and interviews and writing stories and so busy and so tired. And then in the middle of all of that, I would get like your voice is the worst thing I ever heard email just out of nowhere. And I would get so upset about it. So I was like, I have to put an end to this. And I thought it would be an end to it, but it wasn't. But I stood up for myself on the next episode.
Yeah.
And weirdly, that to a lot of like successful women who I've talked to who've told me that they love the podcast, one of the first things that they say is like that second episode when I just said, hey guys, please don't comment on my voice. It doesn't help anything. And I'm doing my best, and you saying that my voice is terrible is like saying my face is terrible. Like, that's a mean thing to say. Just don't say it. Listen to something else. I don't care.
Yes, listen to something else.
Right.
That's the biggest one for me.
Yeah,
Like, turn it off.
You don't have to listen. Right.
This
and
is voluntary.
I tell people this all the time.
Yeah.
They love it. Still to this day, they'll still send me things like that. And I'm like, who is making you listen to this
Right.
podcast? There's like 7 other Murdaugh podcasts at this point. Just go.
Yes.
I don't want
Yes.
you.
You've talked a lot about just being an introvert. How have you dealt with all of this as an introvert?
Well, I'm tired right now. Social battery is very low now. I've learned to just embrace, I don't know, this is a huge challenge for me. Like 2 years ago, I could have never imagined speaking in front of a group of people and my hands not be shaking and face sweating and all of, like, I used to get super horrible nerves. And even when I spoke, Eric remembers, I was really nervous but when I spoke at the Satterfield press release. Yeah, and I think that that's another part of my progression, just like I've learned to challenge myself and I've learned that it's okay. And with introverts, like I've I take comfort in certain people. And so like, I've just learned to balance that, and also just not, I give myself a lot of breaks. Like on the weekends, a lot of times, if I'm super social or I'm super, like I'm doing a lot of book events, and I call it my social battery, and my social battery fills up, I just need to go home and hang out with my dogs, and just a balance. But
Yes.
I think it's important to just be honest and open about those things.
And you've been honest just generally on the topic of mental health, which in our society has become more acceptable. I think you've let people know that it's okay.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I'm really proud of. That was something that came natural to me as the case progressed and things got so incredibly crazy, and I felt like I was working 24/7, and it was just a beat that would not stop. I was very honest with my audience about, like, I'm going through a lot right now, and to me that was the natural thing to do, because I also didn't want to I just wanted to be honest, and I also didn't want people to think like, oh, she's cranking out all these stories during the day, and then she's doing a podcast at night. Like, what am I doing? And I was like, this is very unhealthy what I'm doing. And I don't recommend
Don't be
it
like
to
me.
anyone. Right. And so I think it's important to be open and honest about those things. And I think in journalism, we don't talk about the toll that a lot of these stories take on the storyteller's mental health. And like, journalists carry a lot of weight with them, and they carry a lot of people's very heavy stories and pain with them all the time. And I think that that's something that we need to talk about more. And companies need to be more respectful of the toll that these types of things take on somebody's mental health.
Yes. My students asked a journalist about just that or last week.
Oh,
actually.
really?
Yeah, which I thought was
That's great.
cool on their part. Yeah.
The next generation is doing a way better, like
Yeah, they think about it more.
Gen Z. Yeah,
definitely.
They're much better about it.
Definitely. So another, I guess, issue for you is this story just had so darn many threads. I mean, there was so much going on. How did you keep straight? And do you think you did a good job of that, dealing with all the different aspects?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's another example of like teamwork makes the dream work. A couple months into the story, as things really started to expand with the Satterfield case and the financial crimes, thank God I talked to Liz, and Liz was out of journalism for about 1.5 years at that point, and I knew that she understood the story in the way that hardly anybody else did, and she was able to come on the podcast and really take a huge load off. And so every day we would kind of divide things up and like, okay, there's updates in the boat crash case. You get those. I'll get the Satterfield case, and we tackle them in that way. But I also have ADHD, and that's something I talk about a lot, and I'm very open about. And I just I make lists all the time, and I also just tell people to like not just stick to one thing. Sometimes I wake up and I'm like, you have to hyper focus on the one thing that you're going to be good at that day, and instead of trying to spread yourself thin with a million different strings of the story. And I also had to let go of like, I'm not going to break that a couple months in, I was just like, I have to realize I'm just not going to break every single story with
Yes.
this. So I just have to let go of that, Mandy.
The entire world showed up on our doorstep.
You're not going to do it anymore. And like, that's going to be okay. And you will get through it. You don't have to break every single, because I was getting crazy competitive at that time.
Yes, so this is a good time, I think, to talk about that, just the way that the coverage just exploded of this case. And I think we have a key moment and how it was covered.
A shooting in Hampton County this evening.
Breaking now, a prominent South Carolina attorney at the center of a murder mystery found shot in the head.
Alex Murdaugh, whose wife and son were shot to death back in June, was shot in the head himself.
This morning, a South Carolina man whose wife and son were brutally murdered in June, now recovering after someone shot him this weekend.
I don't know if anyone shot Alex Murdaugh. I'll repeat that statement. I don't know if anyone shot Alex Murdaugh, But ever since the alleged shooting, we've watched the former prominent attorney's reputation unravel in front of us in real time. And again, the more we find out, the more disturbing it gets.
So the podcast just took off, and you went out on your own. What was that like?
Oh my gosh. Well, the shooting was just a crazy. There was already a ton of media on the case, but I remember the weekend of the shooting, and I remember where I was when the New York Times notification came in on my phone that said Alex Murdaugh in the headline. And it was just such a surreal moment for me, because I was like, I have been looking into this guy for so long, and now the New York Times uses his name in a headline and a push notification, and people know who he is. This is insane. Oh my gosh. And around that time too, the story was taking a major toll on my mental health. David and I had a lot of talks about quitting the podcast before that happened. He was like, let's get to 10 episodes. You can do 10. And I think that was 8. So we were at 7, and I was trying to take a break when that happened. And then there was no breaks. But that was all. The shooting was also a major lesson in media, and this is a point that I meant to make earlier, but we'll circle back to. As all of media was focused on like who shot him and not what happened. I knew right off the bat, just like the boat crash story, I was hearing, this is really fishy. There's no way Alex Murdaugh was shot by a random person along the side. Something's going on here. But the media was treating it like it was a legitimate shooting and a legitimate thing. And I was actually going crazy that week, and I saw a tweet and I printed it out and put it in front of my desk that said, if a journalist's job is to tell if it's raining, a journalist's job is to not quote a person who says it's raining and one person who says it isn't. Your job is to go outside and look out the window. And I used that as like my motivator, because it seemed like nobody was looking out the window and nobody was questioning this insane thing that was going on, and just going along with the storyline that he was shot by a rando. And that, I think, motivated me to just keep going with the podcast. And it hit #1, I think, a week after the shooting, or a couple weeks after the shooting, which was pretty cool.
Even that lady driving by said, it looks like a setup.
Yeah. It looks like a setup.
It seemed like a key moment to me.
He did, yeah. I mean, it was immediate right off the bat. And we were hearing things like he has run flat tires, so that doesn't make any sense. I'm hearing that the knife that was used to slash the tires connected to Alex. Well, that doesn't make any sense at all. He said that he was on his way to Charleston, and that road wasn't on the way to Charleston. And there was just things like that where it was just like, why are they just taking the story and just rolling with it? This is insane.
Yeah. So you hit #1,
yeah,
and then you form your own media company.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, I mean, I struggled for a long time with, is this just a temporary thing? Is this just a fluke? I think a lot of women understand that feeling of just not really embracing your success and really questioning it. And I'll admit it, like my husband was like, we have something here, we need to this needs to be a business, and you have a lot of listeners, and this is a really big thing. And yeah, it took a while to get off of entirely independent. And looking back now, I think that's probably one regret, is that it took me too long to go on my own. And I just think that I was struggling with self-confidence, and I wish that I didn't feel like I needed a man to tell me that I was good and tell me that my work was valuable and things. I wish that I just had the confidence to start my own company right then and there, but I'm glad I did when I did, and we're still growing, so that's awesome.
I forgot to write it down. I was going to ask you if you think you have imposter syndrome.
Oh yeah. And I would love to know if that ever leaves.
Yeah, because you're successful.
I don't know. This is an amazing thing to see so many people coming out here, and thank you so much. And this is something that, like, in the back of my mind, I will have a literal, when I get down on myself, I'll think about, like, all those people showed up for you. Like, buck up, you're fine. But yeah, I think that that's something with women that we struggle with a lot, and I think it's natural, and it's natural but it's also a little bit good, because you never want to be complete. You always want to work for more, and you always want to work harder, and you never want to feel like you just deserve everything. And just, I think a little bit of imposter syndrome is good, but I wish I had less.
So you have evolved, and your business has evolved, and one of the ways it has evolved is there's a second podcast now. And I think we have a little bit of audio that people will recognize.
The justice system can be intimidating, but it doesn't have to be. Join us to hold public agencies accountable, because we all want to drink from the same cup of justice. And it starts with learning about our legal system. With tales from the newsroom and the courtroom, Liz Farrell, Eric Bland, and I invite you to gain knowledge, insight, and tools to hold public agencies and officials accountable. If you liked our Cup of Justice bonus episodes, you will love Cup of Justice shows on the new feed. Together, our hosts create the perfect trifecta of legal experience, journalistic integrity, and a fire lit to expose the truth wherever it leads. Search for Cup of Justice wherever you get your podcast, or visit cupofjusticepod.com.
So that and both of your podcasts really deal with the fact that there still are just all these unresolved questions with this case.
Yeah, Cup of Justice evolved. It started with having lots of conversations with Eric, and Eric started on the podcast as a guest in 2021, and I remember when I first started calling him, and I was so excited because I had another voice that I didn't have to fill up the airtime with my voice. I was like, this is great. This guy's enthusiastic. He makes you, and I've always said he talks like a professor. He makes you understand the law in the way that you're interested in and that your average person can understand. And as the case grew and expanded, and there was just so much going on every week, we realized, like, we actually could have enough material for 2 shows here. And not only that, but it's necessary because there's so much going on, and it's so easy for the average person to just kind of accept what's being dished out and not take a second to stop and think about the law involved and think about everything that's going on. And so Cup of Justice, we launched at the beginning or during the trial on its own feed. Mm-hmm. And on the first day, it hit #1 on Apple, which was
Didn't take long that time.
I still can't believe
Didn't even take however many weeks.
I'm a huge Taylor Swift fan. I'm sure everybody in this room knows, and it's written on my forehead. But at the time, Travis Kelce's podcast was #2, and it was just the craziest thing in the universe. And I was like, what is going on? And I knew who Travis Kelce was. I'm a Chiefs fan also. But it's just wild to think about that we were even in that same realm.
So as all this is going on, there's still the trial, there's still the murders. As you sit here now, do you have any doubt at all that Alex Murdaugh is guilty?
No. I have no doubt whatsoever. And I think my book does a good job, I'll say that it does a good job, of explaining how I've become so comfortable with saying that, and all the evidence that it wasn't immediately, like off the bat, I had a feeling that it had to do with the family in some way, shape, or form, just because I knew how terrified people were of the Murdaugh family, and I knew how almost nearly impossible it would be for anybody to sneak on that property and kill Maggie and Paul. But it's still a lot of people, and I still, it's just a hard thing to come to understand that a man could kill his son and wife in that way. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people want to reject that because it's just such a horrible and scary thing. But I've seen enough evidence. He has been convicted. Did David have a clip of that?
He does.
Docket number 2022-GS-15-00593, the State of South Carolina, County of Colleton, in the Court of General Sessions, the July term of 2022. The State versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant. Indictment for murder, SC Code 16-3-0010, CDR Code 0116. Verdict, guilty, signed by the forelady, date 3/2/23.
The court found at the end of the state's case that there's sufficient evidence to find the defendant guilty if the evidence was believed by the jury. Likewise, at the end of the defense's case, when the motion was renewed, the court found that the evidence was sufficient for the jury to find the defendant guilty. The jury has now considered the evidence for a significant period of time, and the evidence of guilt is overwhelming, and I deny the motion.
The evidence of guilt is overwhelming, and I think that that's something that I have thought about a lot. And again, I'm, as I said before, I have imposter syndrome. And I talk a lot in my book about how I've doubted my gut a lot, and my gut has been correct a lot when a lot of people's guts were not correct on this case. Just want to say that. But ultimately the evidence has been overwhelming, and I think our state did a fantastic job in the trial. I think Judge Newman did an amazing job, and Creighton Waters did an amazing job, and I don't think that we're gonna get another trial as hard as they try.
Well, that is a perfect time to ask Eric Bland to join us. He started with you during the trial and can help us look at some of these legal issues.
Sure.
Yeah. Did he get a fair trial?
He got a very fair trial. Today they filed a motion to change venue, and they have asserted that, the public perception has been so skewed against Alex that he can't get a fair trial coming up in the Satterfield case in November 27th, because of all the media coverage. And it's really rich that they made that motion, because Harpootlian's never seen a microphone or a camera that he wouldn't get in front of and talk. More importantly, he was just at CrimeCon with Jim Griffin, and they were recording stuff and releasing it. Buster Murdaugh just was on the Fox documentary, and Jim Griffin is doing a podcast. So Dick has had multiple press conferences throughout the pendency of the murder case and the other cases, done them at the State House or done them in front of his office. So the fact is, when it's convenient for them to use the press and to get that kind of exposure, they're willing to do it. But the truth is that everybody in the world knows who Alex Murdaugh is. We were in Italy, and people talked to us about the Murdaugh case, and you could send them to Greenville. There are just going to be just as many people who know about him, and it's just a delay tactic. Team Murdaugh has been doing everything they could since September in the guilty plea that he did before Judge Gergel to postpone everything. It's, taking a headshot at Judge Newman. It's trying to get the new trial motion and suggesting that Becky Hill overstepped her duties in her office. And now it's we have to feel sorry for Alex because he can't get unbiased and impartial jurors because everybody has already preconceived opinion about him, and it's just not true. People are entitled to their opinions, but people also take an oath that when they go into a jury room that they're going to be fair and impartial. You know, we all have our backgrounds that affect what our opinions are, but that doesn't mean that we can't be objective. We have the ability to listen to a judge and take directive from the judge, and it's really rich because he's already pled guilty to all of these financial crimes. He stood in front of the camera in the world at the murder trial and said, you know, I stole all this money from all of these clients, but yet now he's going to put the state through the paces of having to try each case. And the state, their goal is obviously to keep the murder convictions preserved, but even if they're reversed, they're going to try each individual financial crime case separately, because if they get 3 convictions, these are felonies, in South Carolina, and Mandy knows this, Mandy Norell, it's life without parole. So they're going to get belt and suspenders. That's the goal, so that Alex does his time in state prison, maximum security prison, and not be moved over to a federal penitentiary where it's easier to serve his time, in theory.
Have we learned any more about the death of Gloria Satterfield? Was that an accident?
I believe it was an accident caused by the dogs. Now, of course, Alex's new game is that he's saying that he lied, he made it up, that, you know, he doesn't know how she was tripped and fell, and that, you know, she wasn't entitled to any of the insurance money that ultimately was recovered by Corey Fleming at the time. But it's again, that's another convenience that Alex has, which is the 3 people are dead that could dispute that. Gloria's dead, Paul's dead, and Maggie's dead. He gave a statement to the insurance company 30 days after Gloria died on February 26, 2018, where he said under oath in the interview that she was tripped by the dogs. Maggie and Paul also gave confirmation of that to the police when they came, as well as when they were in front of the whole family after Gloria was put to rest, and Alex suggested that the kids go to Corey Fleming to bring a claim against him. He said the dogs caused the fall, and Maggie and Paul were there, and they didn't dispute that. I think Judge Gergel said it best, and he said it in the Russell Lafitte case. He said, Alex Murdaugh is a fraud and a liar, and he cannot be believed. And so I believe that Gloria did die. She was tripped by the dogs. The dogs were around her when Maggie came out of the house and heard the commotion. And, you know, he's trying to get out of everything that would require him to have to put money up. We've recovered over $7.5 million in connection with Gloria's death from multiple sources, from sources other than Alex. We have a judgment against Alex for $4.3 million, which he gave, but now he wants out of it because the insurance companies that paid the money for Gloria's settlement are now going after him. And now he may have to double pay. And so that's really convenient for him now to have an incentive to change his story. He's a dark man, he's evil, and I think he has a lot of enablers in his life, both before the boating accident and since the boating accident. I think his lawyers are enablers. I think they're doing things that the justice system permits, but there's no repercussions for it. Mandy and I talk about it all the time, that there hasn't been any repercussions for these frivolous motions that they have made. The motion to vacate his judgment, the motion to bring the Satterfield boys into the Nautilus case and make them parties. You know, I always say, just because you can make an argument or make a motion doesn't mean you should. And they seem to be following the opposite of that. If there's a motion that can be made, they're making it. If there's an argument that can be made, they're making it. And I think it's hurt their credibility in front of the courts.
His family, did they enable him previously?
It's hard to stand up to a strong man, and he obviously was a strong man. I think they all enabled each other. If you see every photo of the family, they're all holding a beer or they're holding a drink. So the kids learned from their father, and the friends learned from Paul. I don't know much about Buster, but we know a lot about Paul. And certainly his law partners, certainly the bankers that he did business with, and the important people in Hampton County enabled him. And we have not really gotten to the bottom of how he did what he did. He's a smart criminal at times, but he's not that smart. He's really not as smart. So he had to have help.
Yeah, that's what, I mean, is it feasible he took all that money and they did not know?
No.
Absolutely not.
No.
A law firm has to have.
Yeah.
Law firms have guardrails. We have escrow accounts. Mandy knows this, Mandy Norell. And they had a dedicated CFO. And I'm telling you, every law firm knows what dollar comes in and what dollar comes out, and every lawyer knows what dollar comes in and dollar comes out, because we're all our own little profit centers. We get allocated a certain amount of overhead, whether it's paralegals or assistants or office space, and then we get a certain amount of money that we get if we originate a case or we bring in a fee. So everybody knows what's going on. I think what happened is what has been systematic in Hampton County, which is, everybody's afraid to question Alex. It was just the way it was, an extremely powerful family. And, the truth of the matter is, if we did not break the financial crimes cases, I think that Alex possibly could have gotten away with killing his family. But this woman sitting right here broke it wide open. Listen, there's journalists out here, there's students here. We train for that one moment in our life where something's going to present to us, where we're going to stand up and walk through the door. That's where she was. She had that moment. And she, we always talk about what we talk about. We don't talk about inside a box. We talk outside the box. We live outside the box. And she went to the courthouse and she found one document that said there was a $500,000 settlement in the Satterfield case. Nothing else in there except the dismissal of an action that had a different caption. But she said to herself, this doesn't seem right. How is this possible that there's an order without petitions or complaints or records and transcripts? And she's pesky. She's a pain in the ass, okay? She really is. And she doesn't take no for an answer, and she doesn't go to the regular sources that would give the pat answer. She works the edges. She's like Eminem. She rounds the outside, you know what I mean? And if you're going to be a good journalist, you've got to round the outside. And, she wrote that article at the Island Packet that came out, that there was this $500,000 settlement. What does it mean? And that's what really changed Alex's demeanor, because now there was an external threat to him. It was Mandy Matney. Somebody knew that he did something wrong, because he was telling the family all along, we're trying to make headway with the insurance company. We're not getting anywhere. I think it'll be at the end of the year. And then lo and behold, she finds this document where $500,000 was already paid, and there was a court approval for that. And so now Alex realizes, oh my goodness, what's going on? And then we're now into the spring of 19. What happened? Paul gets charged with DUI boating homicide. What happens? Dick and Jim need money. They're very expensive lawyers. They charge $500,000 for that. Well, Mandy already had known that Alex's income was dropping from 2015 forward. From 2010 to 2015, he had monster settlements in the Pickney case, in the Badger case, in the Plyler case. I represent the Plyler girls. He was making $5 million a year. But in 2016 forward, she was searching the records. There wasn't a lot of records of Alex having settlements. And so his income was going down. Well, Dick and Jim hit him up for $500,000. He's got to figure out where to get that money. Well, exactly the same time that Paul got charged is when they settled the last component of the Satterfield case, which was $3.8 million, and he took all that money. So there is a good probability that the money that Dick and Jim were paid to represent Paul in the murder case came from Gloria Satterfield's proceeds. We keep saying it. Somebody needs to do some type of audit to figure out that if that happened. And so the family hears that Mandy writes this article. First, she writes it in the Island Packet. Then she writes it when she goes to Fitz News. She writes it again. But the family is scared. How are we going to question Alex Murdaugh? How are we going to question that man? And they decided they weren't going to do it. But after the Labor Day shooting happened, they called Mark Tinsley on the telephone. And Mark Tinsley, who's a friend of mine, said, look, I don't sue lawyers, but my friend Eric Bland does. Again, we train all our lives for that one moment. And it's like a collision course. Mandy was on a collision course with Alex, and my partner Ronnie Richter and I were on a collision course with Alex. And I got that phone call from Mark Tinsley who said, hey, I think there's something that you should be interested in. There's this family, they were, their mother worked for Alex and Maggie, and it appears that $500,000 is missing. And, I called my partner Ronnie Richter on the phone and I said, Ronnie, we're in. I wanted to get in this Murdaugh case. I followed it. But how am I going to get in? How am I going to get in? Where's the hook that somebody's going to let me get in? And so, I get retained. And, I'm not a lawyer that writes Hallmark greeting cards, but I wrote a very benign first letter because I've never had a case where a lawyer took all the money. And so I wrote this and said, there must be a misunderstanding. It looks like that there's $500,000 that was recovered. I send a copy of Mandy's article. I send a copy of the order that she harvested. And I got no response. So my second letter wasn't a Hallmark greeting card. It basically said, you got 3 hours to tell me what happened to this money, or, all hell's going to break loose. And they didn't respond. And that's when we knew that there was a problem. And so we immediately filed a lawsuit the next day, which gave us subpoena power. And I have had experience with the press. I like the press. There's a lot of lawyers that are scared of the press. I'm not. I think if you're honest with the press, they will be honest when they write the story. And I knew that I needed the help of Mandy because Mandy had a voice. She was writing for Fitz News. She had a podcast. And so Mark put me in touch with Liz, and Liz put me in touch with Mandy. And I thought we had a really good start, but she didn't feel like that we had a connection.
Yeah, most bad podcasts go to number one right away.
It's in the book.
While we have you, do you think that we will ever know what happened to Stephen Smith? Are we any closer to knowing what's happening there?
Well, we were talking about that last night. We were at dinner, and we're frustrated. Mandy has done so much in bringing Stephen's case to light. Stephen's been the forgotten body. There's 5 bodies, don't forget, in this Murdaugh saga. There's Maggie and Paul, there's Gloria and Mallory Beach. And then there's Stephen Smith. 5 bodies in the orbit of one family is chilling. And, Mandy's been on the hunt on this case since probably 20 and then 21 when the file was released by the Highway Patrol. And of course, we exhumed the body. And we were making really good progress, I think, through the spring and the summer with SLED. But it's kind of died down. There was a grand jury. And I wrote Judge Keel last night at the dinner table. And I said, look, we're getting frustrated. I need to talk to you this week. And poor Sandy Smith, she has been like a yo-yo. She thinks that there's an answer. She's not looking for a prosecution, by the way. She's not looking for somebody to be prosecuted.
She wants to know what
peace.
happened.
Right.
She wants answers.
Yeah.
That's all we all want.
Yeah.
Yes.
And something happened to Stephen where a lot of people in Hampton County know about it. And we were really encouraged when people were willing to come forward at the murder trial and testify that we finally thought this cone of silence was going to be broken, that people can come forward and not suffer the repercussions. And then we were told that there's 5 or 6 people that have material information about how Stephen died. Not necessarily that they were suspects or person of interest, but that they have relevant information. But it's gone cold. And so I have a microphone. Mandy and David have given me that microphone, and I'm going to use it. And I'm going to go back to the press, who I like, who are my friends. We use each other. The press uses lawyers.
Don't give away all the secrets.
And it's a symbiotic relationship, but we use each other in a good way.
Yeah.
And, don't be afraid if you're a lawyer to go to the press, and press, don't be afraid to go to lawyers. Don't take, I have nothing to say, I'll say it when we get to court. Work that lawyer. And Mandy worked me. And I have a big mouth. It's one of my assets, but it's one of my detriments. And we really hit it off.
It took a minute, though.
And
this is in the book. It's funny because you mentioned John Monk, and he actually gave a few scoops to John Monk while all of this was going on.
He was working the room.
Oh, I was mad. And I was trying to get Eric to call me back, and then I kept seeing these stories in the state being broken, and I was like,
it stopped in October of 2020.
It did, and it's in the book.
Then she put me on the podcast. And
I sent
we were
Eric
like brother and sister on the podcast.
Right. But I had to send him a text that was like, listen, man.
Yeah.
No.
But honestly, we talked. We
yeah.
talked every night from 7 o'clock at night to 11 o'clock at night, almost through the fall of 2020.
But I think this is important for students. Those conversations that you have with lawyers that aren't necessarily, you're not going to get a quote for your story the next day, but it's conversations that you're actually trying to figure out what is going on here. Those are so worth having, and getting to know a lawyer in the way that, Eric would call me at 6 a.m. He would be like, I thought of this with the Murdaugh thing, because we were both just like, it was a 24/7. We were always thinking, we were trying to figure out this mystery, and we ended up working it together, and it was a great thing. But you don't have that if you just only call lawyers for a short quote, and that's it. You gotta figure out. I always tell people, like, what are you not telling me? What's going on here?
Yes.
And that's the way to get the
She was telling me that it was much more than 500,000, and she knew I was going on TV at the time because TV was going to get the story out even more. And so I was going out. She was saying, "Go out there and say it's much more than 500,000." And first I said it's $1 million that was stolen, and then $2 million. And my partner's like, "Where are you getting this information?" And I'm like, I believe that it was that much money. And then when we found out it was $4.3 million, we were just aghast that, all the money was stolen from this family. And then we heard that Alex watched as Brian, the son that is a vulnerable adult, was kicked out on the street from the mother's trailer. It was foreclosed on. And he's sitting on all that money, and the kid would sit out on the street. That's why I say that, every once in a while, we produce somebody that is just so immoral and so devoid of conscience. And, you know, he's got shark eyes, okay? He's got great white shark eyes. If you look in his eyes, it's, you know, you're looking through nothing. And he's a dangerous man. And he preyed on, you know, it drives me crazy when lawyers take advantage of clients, because these people that he took advantage of were at their most vulnerable time. They lost a loved one. They had a catastrophic injury where they had to have treatment for the rest of their life. And, you know, he's handing them millions of dollars, and they don't question him. You know, they're grateful that he's, you know, settling these cases, but he's shaving $1 million or $2 million off the top. And, you know, the Arthur Badger case is, to me, as bad as the Satterfield case, because he took $1.3 million of their money, and that man lost his wife and raised 5 kids. And from 2013 to 2023, he could have used $1.3 million. He got it back in 23, but life was not good for him from 2013 to 23.
And it's more than money when you steal. I mean, you steal opportunities from people. You steal their value of life. And it was just, I mean, when you take these crimes apart, which I'm really proud that we did this on the podcast. Like, we had the Pinckney family on the podcast. We had the Plyler girls. And give a real voice to these financial crimes, because I feel like sometimes financial crimes can be, A, very boring, B, hard to understand for people, and C, just kind of like washed over, and people act like they're not nearly as bad as other crimes. But these were horrific things.
Real
to do
people
to
that had real horrible
people.
things happen to them.
Right.
Yeah, you know, when you steal with a pen.
So I know we have already some questions.
Oh, yeah.
And people in here, we have our ambassadors who can take your questions. We already have some virtual questions coming in, and we want to make sure we have time to get to those. Mandy, someone wants to know the impact of Liz joining you.
Oh my gosh.
And she couldn't be with us here in person tonight, but
She can't. She's having surgery this week. But love you, Liz, wherever you are. No, Liz is an amazing, and she's a very important person in the book, and she's throughout this entire journey. The book starts out, the first chapter is called Thelma and Louise, and it was about when we were at the Island Packet together, and we just clicked as not only friends, but coworkers. And when you get a relationship like that, we always say it's like magic. She can finish my sentences, I finish hers, and my husband has seen this happen. And my husband, who spends all of every minute of every day, pretty much. We spend all day together because we work together. But Liz and David's like, whoa, you guys have something going on. But it's just an amazing partnership. And it's also amazing, and I want women to know this, that like, we don't have to cut each other down. We can lift each other up. And you can have a coworker who you make each other better, and it doesn't have to be this horrible competitive thing. And Liz is a brilliant person and a fantastic journalist and writer.
She is. She's a female Hunter Thompson, gonzo journalist, and she has one of the most biting senses of humor that I have ever been around.
she does have, I've heard that,
Oh,
definitely.
man, yeah, I would not want to get on Liz's bad side.
And it's helped us
So
because
a viewer, Anne, has asked us, is there anything that you regret doing or not doing while you were covering the Murdaugh case?
I think just, I wish I had more confidence earlier on. I wish I trusted my gut earlier on. It all ended up working out in a good way, and thank God Alex was convicted, and thank God. I think the most important part of this work is that people are now having conversations about the justice system, and we're now actually asking ourselves the tough questions when it comes to, and people are interested, and I love that. I don't necessarily regret a single thing, because it was all a part of this very weird, strange, long journey. And
So Patty asks, is there anything you can learn from your critics? Have they been right about anything?
This is hard because I don't think a lot of people understand what it's like to have an inbox full of strangers that are critiquing your work and your every move, and constantly getting feedback. But I don't remember where I heard this. Somebody said, your trolls and your critics you never will meet a critic who's doing more than you. And nobody who's criticized me has been an amazing person in journalism or an amazing author or a podcaster or anything. Like a lot of women who have reached out to me who are more successful, that we complement each other, like you don't bother critiquing. I think that, my voice needed some help at the beginning, but I was just tired, and it would have been nice. They didn't have to say that in that way. So,
I started to read it earlier, so I'm going to do it now. So cover your ears if you don't like bad words. Somebody writes to you right away. Pull your head out of and speak normally. Who writes that to somebody?
And that man was a doctor, and I remember that, and I was like, what? And he messaged me on my personal Facebook, just a message, just coming into it, like, I just don't understand why people feel like they, need to say those things out loud to anybody.
Right.
And, just to take the time out of your day to find the person, it's just insane.
So Mercedes asks, where do you think you would be in your career if you had not encountered the Murdaugh story?
I probably would have left journalism. I was always looking for an easy out. I was always trying to find a sweet PR job or something. No offense to PR people, but that always sounded like the dream job to me. And it was just getting really, really hard to. It didn't feel like it had journalism didn't feel like it had a purpose or a direction. So I would have probably left journalism and done something else. And that's crazy to think about.
As you've covered all this, were you ever afraid for your safety?
Yeah, a lot. And that's another thing I talk about in the book, but it's very hard. Doing these events, for example, I wouldn't have imagined it a couple years, 2 years ago, because I was so terrified to go out in public. We got all sorts of cameras for our house. I got just very paranoid, and the amount of people that, even in 2019 when I started writing about the Murdaughs, I got a lot of very vague, be careful when you're writing about these people type messages, and that stuff sticks in your head. But it didn't stop me because it was just the right thing to keep going, and the fear was reminding me of why all of this is so important. And I think people use fear as a form of control, and we saw that in Hampton County. Nobody said anything for so long because they were terrified, and I was very thankful to have people to stand with me, like Eric and Liz, and we all, and Justin Bamberg used to call me and be installing he's like, I got more security cameras just in case, because this is getting weird. We're all in this weird, but it was good to have people that could relate to that level of fear, because it was something that I had never dealt with before. And I also think it's okay to be honest about it. I was scared for a really long time, but when Alex got arrested, I will say I remember sleeping. That was the first night I slept. That whole summer, basically, I felt just better when he was in jail.
Are people in Hampton County still afraid of them?
Yeah. Well, and I think that my book is called Blood on Their Hands because there was a lot of people that enabled this disaster, these horrible crimes. There was a lot of people who knew that Alex was up to no good and said nothing and did nothing, and who allowed these things to happen for so long, and so few people have been arrested in this, so few people have been held to account. And that's why the fear is still there, because, I mean, anybody could, you look at these crimes and it's very obvious that there's no way just 3 people were the only ones involved in this.
Do you think he had help in the murders?
Not in the murders per se, but I think he might have had help cleaning up. I think people in his circle knew what was going on and did nothing and said nothing. And again, I think that there was people like Corey Fleming who were knee deep in the crimes that were terrified of the murders exposing them, so they just kept their heads down, and that's dead wrong. It's horrible.
There have been people who've asked some questions about Cousin Eddie. Do you think that Alec confessed the murders to him? Do you think the scheme on the road went down the way it was meant to go?
Oh, man.
Or did something go wrong there?
That roadside shooting is just I think Cousin Eddie knows more than he's saying. I think he's a complicated character because he's not like Corey Fleming and Russell Laffitte, where he had the means and the power to say no to Alex. And so I think he was used. I honestly, and I will still say this, I don't think Alex got shot. I think that the bullet ricocheted in some way.
Yeah,
I think the
I saw a
bullet went
picture
off.
recently, or that like it was the road even maybe. I don't even remember where I saw that, but there was like.
He says that the road, he fell on his head,
Yeah.
or he got a rock and just.
Yeah.
I wouldn't put it past him.
Yeah.
There's just no way that a bullet could have gone, and it's Alex, it's just so insane, and I don't think he was actually shot. And that's another thing. I'm looking forward to when that goes too. There's outstanding charges on that.
Yeah,
and,
it's got to be heard.
right, and I hope that it's heard soon. And
A guy like Alex needs a Corey Fleming and a Russell Laffitte, but he also needs a Cousin Eddie.
Right.
Because the cousin, no, seriously,
Yeah.
Cousin Eddie gets his hands dirty in a way that lawyers and bankers can't. And he does hold some stories that I think would probably give some explanation. Don't forget, we uncovered, our team, that $2.4 million was paid to Eddie from 2018 to 2022 from Alex's bank accounts in the form of cashier's checks, which he would cash. So, you know, Corey Fleming wasn't going to do that. Russell Laffitte wasn't going to do that. And if you're going to be a guy like Alex Murdaugh, you need a Cousin Eddie. So Eddie's got to be talking. You know, he hasn't been brought to trial. So,
Are you still suing him?
he's technically, yeah. Technically, yeah.
So where did all this money go? Was Alec just living a high life and
No.
couldn't afford it? Or
It's there. It's in partnerships. I think a lot of it's buried. I think he has cash, a lot of cash that's buried that Buster ultimately will get. I think that he was selling drugs as well as, you know, doing some of the opioids. He clearly wasn't, you know, taking that amount of drugs that Dick was suggesting that he would take.
It's a lot of
Look,
drugs.
he would be in auto accidents. He would fall asleep
Yeah.
in court. He would, you know.
He would have died.
He would have died. So
None of this would have happened. He would
there's
have been
money.
dead a long
There's
time.
money there. Whether we're ever going to find it, I don't know.
So Mandy, you've gone out on your own. You've started your own business. You know, you are practicing a kind of advocacy journalism where you want certain things to go certain ways. What is your advice to you know, students and new journalists? Is this the future? What you're doing?
I would just say the rules of journalism has evolved so much, and there's so many companies that are still stuck to these same rules that just don't make sense anymore with the internet and with the way society has evolved. And we have to change, journalism has to change too. I think the most important thing that I have done is just as a journalist, you have to stick to the truth. And as long as you're telling the truth and you stick to the truth and you are transparent with your audience about how you came to your reporting, why, and your process. And I think that is the future, because there are so many, I mean, you see every day. I highly recommend no one checking Twitter, but you see that people just don't trust that people don't trust the New York Times like they used to. People don't trust NBC News like they used to. But people, I think the future is people trusting individual journalists and saying, I know this individual journalist and I'm going to follow them, and they tell the truth. So I think that is just the most important thing. And I know that people say she's not a journalist because she says her opinions. She's not a journalist because, but like you said, like Hunter S. Thompson developed his own form of journalism, I think. But he was a man, so he was allowed to do that.
Mandy made a lot of calls on different things happening and what was going to bear fruit. She never missed it. She never had to print a retraction. She was never wrong, ever. And that's a pretty good record to have throughout this whole process, that she had good sources, she never burned a source, and when she made thought about what was going to happen and stated it, it bore fruit. So, I like to say that Team Murdaugh's 0 for 9 in every motion that they've made. They've never won a motion. She's 9 for 9.
Mandy, when the trial was over, Alan Wilson praised reporters and said they had been, he said he praised them for their coverage, essentially. Do you agree with him? Did the media acquit itself well in the end with that trial?
I mean, it's hard, and I too, you confuse in your mind, like there's TV news and there's talking heads on TV, and that's different from journalism. And I think the basic journalism coverage was great during the trial, and there were so many reporters in Walterboro. It was unbelievable. I've never seen anything like that before in my entire life. What I had a problem with was throughout the trial, there was a lot of coverage and a lot of leeway to this idea that, there was a lot of legal experts that said this is going to be a hung jury. And the media kind of did attach to that, and Eric started to believe it a little bit. I mean, we all started freaking out a little bit, like, is there going to be a hung jury? Because you were on a lot of those shows where there was lots of experts
I disagree. I think that journalism missed it a little bit. They got caught up into the Dick show, and they got caught up in his flamboyance and his reputation. And we talked about it this week on our podcast that I guess will come out tomorrow, that, when he makes a motion, it's explosive. It's, so many different adjectives, and the journalists work it up. But then when the state files their response, which is, tooth jarring when you really read it and it's factual, they just, the state filed its response and they disagree. The words and the adjectives are so much different when it's written on the state side. And I was one of the few people on TV that felt during the trial the state was winning. And everybody else was, oh no, the defense is winning and all. So I'm not sure it was as balanced as it should be during the trial.
Yeah, it's hard. And I honestly didn't I was so busy during the trial and just working on our own coverage that most days I didn't even have time to turn on the TV or anything. So it's hard to say. But since the trial, I would agree with Eric that journalists have gotten they just go for the most fiery and exciting and click-worthy part of the story and hone in on that, and they don't think about, well, what is the truth and what actually
And they're not
happened.
holding the Murdaugh team accountable when they make these explosive allegations that don't actually bear out and pan out. They should be held accountable for it, but they're not.
So Mandy, of yourself, when you look back on this 4-year journey, what are you the most proud of?
I'm proud that I stuck to my gut and that I stuck to this mission. When David and I started the podcast, David looked at me one day and was like, we have to have a mission. We have to have a mission that makes sense. Otherwise, we're just going to go into all these different directions. And everything that we do has to be a part of that mission. So we sat down and we made a list, and to tell the truth, to follow the story wherever it leads, and to give a voice to the voiceless. And I am most proud that we have really stuck to that guideline. And not only that, in a world of media and clickbait where it is easiest to go to the most sensational part of the story and the most, to focus on Cousin Eddie or something that doesn't matter. But we stuck to that mission, and we stuck to doing that. And we got an audience to listen to that. And that was the most amazing part. It's like we not only were doing really great work and work that truly mattered, but the world was listening. And I think that should be a lesson to everyone, that you can do it. And the world will tell you otherwise, but don't listen to them.
That's a fantastic message to end on. I just want to take a moment to Mandy and Nina and Eric, thank you again so much for a fantastic evening. Thank you. Hey, just real quick, I want to mention a couple things. Obviously, these are challenging times to be a journalist, and we take our role as journalism educators very seriously. We're celebrating the school's centennial this year. The school was founded 100 years ago to train journalists and communicators. And while journalism is changing and the way that we distribute our messages is changing, I think you'll agree its importance has not changed. We appreciate your interest and support as we educate the next generation of students. I want to thank Randy Covington for orchestrating this event this evening, our student ambassadors, our communications and events team, and Dean Hubbard and the newly named law school for giving us access to this wonderful room tonight. And for those of you who would like Mandy to sign your copy of Blood on Their Hands, just come on up to the front of the auditorium, and thank you so much for your attention tonight. Thank you.